Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday. It's already been a month in 2022. Time flies very quickly. I hope you had a chance to start your New Year's resolutions. I've been pretty consistent with my daily exercise so far. I don't see the results yet, unfortunately, but I know that it's consistency that matters. Last week, we talked about the first false love triangle, where due to the feeling of lack of love, the archangel Lucifer left his position as a servant of God and ended up seducing Eve to gain dominion over her. And then Eve then seduced Adam, and they both inherited and passed on false love throughout the generations. So there was a false love triangle between the Lucifer, Adam, and Eve, when the original plan was for it to be the original triangle of love, or original love, which was between God, Adam, and Eve. So the question that occurred was, how could something like that happen? Why would God design such a flawed situation where there was even the possibility for this tragedy of false love to permeate throughout human history? So today, I wanted to explore the answer to that question by sharing about the power of love and the power of principle. How God created love to be more powerful than principle, and why. So let's start with the power and limitations of principle. Let's read. Human beings are created through the principle, and they are meant to live according to the way of the principle. The force inherent in the principle guides their growth in the proper direction. So it says here that the force inherent in the principle is what guides our growth towards a proper direction. This includes all the things that we covered in the principles of creation, where we learned about the dual nature of God and in everything. We also learned about the power of give and take action and the purpose with which we were created. So all those things are part of this principle, or these universal laws that help guide us naturally towards goodness. And knowing these principles can be quite useful. So the more that we study them, the more that we're aware of them, the more we can intentionally live according to those universal laws. Let's continue to read. Although God created human beings based on the principle, he governs us through love. Accordingly, in order for love to fulfill its proper role, its power must be stronger than the power of the principle. If the power of love were weaker than the power of the principle, God could not govern human beings through love. Rather, we would pursue the principle more than the love of God. So the principle is explained to us that God created us based on these principles, but chose to govern us through love. In other words, God created love to be stronger than the principle. Why? Because God didn't want our relationship to be just based on law and order. Otherwise, it would be a very organized but cold world. Maybe a good analogy would be like the military or boarding school. Things are very strict and orderly, but it wouldn't be kind of a loving atmosphere. So God created these laws of the universe to organize it, make things clear, but he wanted to have a relationship with us through love, not just based on order. Let's continue to read. In their immature state, Adam and Eve could not be directly governed by God through love. God foresaw that if they ever formed a common base with the archangel, there was a possibility that they could succumb to the power of deviant, unprincipled love and fall. To prevent this, God gave Adam and Eve the commandment that forbade them from relating with the archangel in this way. So according to the principle, God knew that there was a risk for Adam and Eve to be tempted in this immature state. That's why God gave the commandment very clearly, thou shalt not eat, else you shall surely die. He said that to make sure that they wouldn't make this grave mistake. Growing up, learning the principle, I actually learned the principle. I mean, I guess I grew up with it, but I learned it more specifically in middle and high school. That's when I went more deeply into it. And I felt that it really protected me from premature love relationships. I did have a crush in seventh grade. It was a long crush. It was like 6 years long, all through middle and high school. She was really cute, bubbly, smart. Um, I think I actually decided to study German just to be in the same class with her. Guten Tag, ich habe Deutsch 4 Jahre in Hochschule gestudiert. Anyway, I didn't act on my feelings because I knew I was in a premature state. Actually, probably just too scared to do anything. But either way, it was very helpful to have these basic guidelines of understanding principle to prevent me from making some premature mistakes. Also, I remember in 8th grade, I joined my high school's cross-country team. And as you might guess, most of the chatter in the locker room was about girls and relationships. And there's a lot of drama. Sometimes they're talking about who slept with who, and there was a little bit of fighting over, the same girl and things like that. I just remember one guy. I was in 9th grade. He was a sophomore. He was a really sincere guy, but he was really heartbroken over a broken relationship. And right around that time, I had written an article for the school newspaper where I shared about the marriage blessing and also the importance of commitment as a prerequisite for a lasting love relationship. Surprisingly, that same day, my coach, he publicly complimented me on the article in front of the whole cross-country team. And this brother, although he was 1 year my senior, he started asking me for relationship advice. Anyway, I just felt like understanding these principles really provided valuable guidance towards goodness and protected me from the lack of love feelings that come, and again, the temptation towards premature relationships. Okay, now that we talked about the power and limitation of principle, let's talk about the power and danger of love. Let's read. The force which is stronger than the force of the principle is none other than the power of love. While human beings are in the state of immaturity, it is possible that the power of unprincipled love can induce them to fall. So, very simple but clear point, the power of love is more powerful than the power of principle. And particularly in a state of immaturity, where we haven't fully matured our love, then there's always a possibility to fall. Let's continue. Tragically, Adam and Eve did not obey the commandment, but formed a common base with the archangel and had give and take with him. Hence, the power of illicit love pushed them off the track. We can see in the story of Adam and Eve that even with the principle and God's commandment, the power of illicit love pushed them off track. That's really important to remember, that even if you know the principle and you understand God's commandment, you are not immune to fallen premature love. So what can we do? Is there any way we can avoid this premature false love? Let's read. No matter how powerful the unprincipled love of the archangel might be, had Adam and Eve adhered to God's commandment, forming a common base with God and engaging in give and take with him and no other, the power of the archangel's unprincipled love would not have affected them, and they would never have fallen. So the key here was maintaining give and take with God instead of the archangel. By having regular interaction with God and God's word, instead of engaging in fallen culture, that's what can protect you. In one sense, there's an old adage that whatever you put energy into, whatever you think of, that's what grows. So naturally, if you're engaging with God's word, if you're thinking about goodness, then that's what gets stronger. But if you're engaging in fallen culture, in pornography, and in things that you know are not true and good, then that's the energy that's going to grow within you. So really the key was, even if the temptation came, if Adam and Eve had simply understanding the principle and the commandment and had more give and take with God, then they would have not made this grave mistake. Of course, hindsight is 2020. So it's easy to kind of point out what went wrong, but when you're facing it yourself, it's really not easy to overcome that kind of challenge. Just to share an example, I might have shared this before, but I remember the biggest challenge for me related to this topic was in college. The principle and the understanding God's commandment really helped me get through high school. But college was a totally different story, because in college, I wasn't living with my parents. I was in the dormitory. There's no kind of real rules and regulations. I remember in my freshman dormitory, there was co-ed bathrooms and co-ed showers. Yeah, it's just like people are just walking around the hallways in pajamas. It's a very kind of unstructured space. In any case, so I remember, anyway, long story short, there was, I did have a crush on a girl, and she was in my Japanese class, I guess. Yeah, it was my Japanese class. Why am I taking Japanese class? Good question. I was trying to get good grades for transferring to my the business school, to be honest. But anyway, the challenge with that was that, when there was an attraction, I was trained to kind of just put it out there and be clear. I'm kind of preparing myself for marriage, and that's not something I'm interested in right now. But that got her more curious. And even though I told her, my faith background and the traditions of the marriage blessing, that didn't prevent her from kind of engaging. Anyway, she got to a point where she was interested enough that she would invite me to have a meal with her parents, and so on and so forth. So it was getting to a point where I really had to decide what I wanted to do. It's one thing to understand the principle and kind of go this way of life based on your knowledge, but it's a totally different thing to apply it fully in your life. Interestingly, at that time, my friend invited me to a one-year missionary program called STF, or Special Task Force. And I really reflected and I prayed about it. I asked God, what should I do? Should I go with this relationship, or should I not? This was a very difficult choice, but in the end, I really felt that I needed to make a clear decision in my life, and not just based on my knowledge of the principle, but based on my personal understanding and relationship with God. So I decided to, after my first year of college, I went to the 1 year missionary training. And there I had a lot of time to develop a more personal relationship with God, and strengthen my faith. In one sense, I was really strengthening that, having more give and take with God, and strengthening my foundation of faith. So that led to a second year, and then also that led naturally to getting blessed in marriage. And the rest, as they say, is history. So just want to share that because it's one thing to know it in your head, but it's a totally different thing to actually experience the real draw of love and relationships, especially when you're in that age, high school, college age. Okay, now that we talked about the power and limitations of principle, as well as the power and danger of love, I'd like to go into the super powerful combination of principle and love, or principled love. Let's read. Was God's commandment not to eat of the fruit binding forever? God's second blessing was to be fulfilled when Adam and Eve entered God's direct dominion of love by joining as true husband and wife and bearing and raising children in God's love. Indeed, the principle mandates that human beings eat of the fruit once they reach full maturity of character. The commandment not to eat or not to have sex was only temporary. If Adam and Eve overcame this kind of premature desire for love and obeyed God's commandment until they fully matured, then God would have blessed them in marriage, said, now you guys are ready. I will allow you now to, you have unlocked the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And basically with God's blessing, they could have engaged in loving each other as husband and wife. That was God's plan. So sex itself is not evil. The problem is if it's done prematurely, self-centeredly, and based on physical attraction, then it can be quite destructive. It really stunts your spiritual growth when you engage in premature sexual activity. And interestingly enough, it tends to turn you away from God and God's original love. I think it's because sex is a very powerful experience. And so if you connect sexual activity with selfishness, then it naturally leads you away from God. Whereas if you start engaging in sexual activity together with a sense of selflessness, sense of purpose, and with God's blessing, then that sexual experience can actually guide you and lead you towards God. So by engaging in this false love, Adam and Eve pretty much chose to turn away from God's love, and that's what has continued throughout history until now. But what would have happened if Adam and Eve chose to obey God's commandment until full maturity? Let's read. It was not only to prevent their fall that God gave immature human beings the commandment. God also wanted them to enjoy dominion over the natural world, including the angels, by inheriting his creative nature. In order to inherit this creatorship, human beings should perfect themselves through their faith in the word as their own portion of responsibility. So if they had obeyed God's commandment, Adam and Eve would have matured to have authority of love over all of the natural world, including angels. In fact, as children of God, they would have inherited this power of co-creatorship, and based on God's love, been able to not only rule over creation, but be able to co-create things together with God. In one sense, it's like this. It's like learning an instrument, right? When you first learn an instrument, you need to follow all the rules, regulations, practice. You're studying other people's pieces and so on and so forth. But when you reach true mastery, you're able to fully express your creativity, and you can even create original pieces. Another analogy that might help is like driving a car. You have to study, learn, practice, and do all these things in order to get a license to be able to drive a car. In that sense, God wanted to give us the key to true love, but we needed to mature ourselves and earn the license to love first. Then God would have freely and with confidence been able to give that key to love, which is basically his blessing to engage in that love relationship between husband and wife. All right, so let's read the final passage. Had Adam and Eve reached perfection, become a godly husband and wife, and experience God's direct governance by the absolute power of his love, their conjugal love would have been absolute. No person, no power in the universe could ever break that bond of love. Principle without love is cold, but love without principle is dangerous. That's why you need both. If you have both love and principle, it's a truly powerful combination. And that's how we can unlock this power of true love, which is unbreakable. In one sense, God took a risk with love. He knew that the power of love was more powerful than the power of principle, because that's how he designed it to be. But he wanted Adam and Eve to earn their right as lords of creation by overcoming this temptation on their own accord, by listening to God's commandment, and learn this discipline as a foundation to truly love. So that even though they're feeling attractive, feeling tempted, they control it. They say, you know what? Now, right now, God told me not to. I'm going to really focus on growing myself as a mature individual. If they had done that, then they would have earned the right or got the license to really love truly. And although they failed in their initial attempt, God is longing for the day when all his children, including us, break through in this realm of true love and experience true joy together with God. So in summary, number one, love is more powerful than the principle. Second, the principle and having give and take with God is key to overcoming the temptation of premature love. I'm going to repeat this one. This is so important. Understanding the principle and having give and take with God is key to overcoming the temptation of premature love. And three, a balance of love and principle is what leads to true love, the most powerful force. I just want to add one more thing about this third part, because although right now I'm emphasizing principle as a prerequisite and foundation for true love, I want to also say that too much principle without love also doesn't work so well, right? So even in our family, especially for the next generation who grew up in this community, if you just go by principle because this is the right thing to do, this is a law, then it also becomes very dry and cold. So it's really important for those who have studied the principle that you don't just limit it to principle as a prerequisite to love, but really that you have a balance of both principle and love. So that it's not just based on rules and law and order and what's right to do, but that you're also tapping into and balancing it with God's love, God's unconditional love, with forgiveness, grace, all those things. And with both, principle, and love, that's how you access true love. So in conclusion, let's not repeat the failures of the past and strive to have a healthy balance of love and principle in all of our relationships. God is longing for the day when all of his children can experience this true love. So with this knowledge, we can play an active role in working towards true love and modeling it in our own lives, in our families, and in our communities. May God bless you and your family this week.